Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the latest in our Sage Talk series, 5 ways to take your entrepreneurship teaching to the next level. Let me begin by introducing you to our speaker, Heidi M. Heidi M is a Babson College professor and the Jeffrey A. Tibbins Professor of Entrepreneurial Studies. She has taught entrepreneurship at the undergraduate, MBA, and executive levels. NEC is the president of the United States Association of Small Business and Entrepreneurship, an academic organization dedicated to the advancement of entrepreneurship education. She is faculty director of the Babson Collaborative, a global institutional membership organization for colleges and universities seeking to increase their capability and capacity in entrepreneurship education. Additionally, NEC is faculty director of Babson Symposia of Entrepreneurship Educators, programs designed to further develop faculty from around the world in the art and craft of teaching entrepreneurship and building entrepreneurship programs. Through her leadership, she has directly trained over 2,000 educators around the world. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this 1-hour webinar will be recorded and archived for future viewing. We'll be sending out a link to view it and to access the slides to all registrants in the coming weeks. If you have any problems with audio or viewing mode during the webinar, please use the Q&A box to the right of your screen, and one of our helpful team members will get back to you as soon as possible. At the end of the webinar, we will have some time for question and answers from attendees, so please also use the Q&A box to ask any questions to speakers throughout the webinar. Please also take note of the webinar hashtag, #SageTalks, and feel free to ask questions or leave comments there. In today's discussion, Heidi M will talk about different ways to bring your entrepreneurship teaching to the next level with 5 simple yet powerful tips. After hearing from Heidi M, we will move on to the Q&A session where Heidi will answer questions that you have submitted via the question and answer box, as well as those that tweeted using the Sage Talks hashtag. We'll do our best to get all questions answered, but if we are not able to get all of them in today, we will allow Heidi the opportunity to respond to those offline, and we'll include a link to the answers after our event. Without further ado, let me turn the mic over to Professor Heidi M.
Thanks, Jill. Thank you to everyone who's online and who chose to spend some time with me today, and I also want to thank Sage for hosting this webinar. I'd like to start off with a story that may bring us a better understanding as to why I chose these 5 ways to elevate your entrepreneurship teaching. I've been teaching at Babson College, gosh, for now 15 years, but my teaching journey really started during my years as a doctoral student at the University of Colorado Boulder. When I first started my doctoral studies, they allowed me to teach strategy, and I got really bored teaching strategy. And then finally in 1999, I was asked to teach an Introduction to Entrepreneurship course at the undergraduate level, primarily for juniors and seniors. And they gave me a lot of leeway in what I did with the syllabus, and so I decided to introduce a particular module on creativity and the entrepreneurial mindset. And the way I was going about teaching creativity and the mindset was using games from improvisational theater. Again, I knew nothing about improvisation per se, but I had seen improvisation. I'm like, there's a lot here that we can use in an entrepreneurship classroom. I mean, when you really think about theatrical improvisation, it's all about the art of listening or building and telling a story or creativity and even making connections among things that are seemingly unconnected. There's a lot about spontaneity and quick response, and I also thought that teamwork would be a really big byproduct of improvisation, as well as students tolerating ambiguity and uncertainty. So there was lots of different things coming out of improvisation that I thought would be really cool to teach the students about in an entrepreneurship class. And so I go in to this day on the module around creativity and improvisation, and there's about 40 students in the class, and we spend the entire class session doing these improvisational games. And if you know anything about improvisation and facilitating it, you really can't control a lot of what happens. So there's a lot of humor, but it doesn't happen intentionally. It just happens as a byproduct. So we were just in hysterics in that classroom. And it just, we paused after each game and we took away the exercises, or at least we debriefed the exercises and what it talked about or what it related to with respect to entrepreneurship. It was just a fun class. It was a class I'll never forget. So I leave that class and the students are happy, and I get a phone call, because we weren't even using email all that much back then. I get a phone call from the chair of the department asking to meet with me. So I went over to the chair of the department and I sat down, and he said, "Heidi, I'd like to talk to you about what was going on in your class today." And I'm like, "Sure, I'll be happy to talk about it." He goes, "Actually, I don't want to hear what you did, but whatever you did," he said, "you can't do it again." And I'm like, "Why not?" And he's like, "Well, the classroom next door complained that you were too loud." I said, "But don't you want to know what I did?" He's like, "No, I don't care what you did. Just don't do it again." So I walked out of that meeting with the chair of my department, and I reflected. I'm like, I'm being trained to be an entrepreneurship researcher. I'm being trained to be an entrepreneurship teacher. But no one's really training me on how to teach entrepreneurship. But one thing that I learned that day was that we have to teach entrepreneurship in a different way. And it wasn't necessarily about the content of what we were teaching, but it was about the how of what we were teaching. Like, I really needed to pay more attention about what I do in the classroom and what I ask my students to do inside and outside the classroom, because everything that I was doing around in the classroom was creating a particular culture, a particular climate around entrepreneurship. And if I'm expecting my students to think and act entrepreneurially, so do I as a teacher. And I'll never forget that, walking out of that office of the chair of the department going, "Wow, what have I gotten myself into?" But fortunately, I was allowed to go to Babson College that embraced entrepreneurial teaching at all levels. And over the past 15 years, there's some little things that I do in my classroom that I want to share with you, and that's where these 5 ways to elevate your teaching comes in for this webinar today. And perhaps the title is wrong. Perhaps the title should be 5 ways I've elevated my entrepreneurship teaching, because I'm just simply sharing with you some of the things I've done, just little things really that have helped me, but they may not all work for you. So I'm just kind of sharing what's worked for me and hoping that maybe some of what I do can help you. But really, at the end of the day, teaching is very personal, so you have to do what makes you authentic in your own teaching. So the 5 things I have here: an open letter, day 1 choices, challenges versus chapters, preparing the room, and the entrepreneurial course. I'm going to walk through these fairly quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions about anything that I've talked here about or anything that's on your mind. So first, I want to address the open letter. So I've experimented with giving out a letter to my students via email before day 1 of the class. They actually get it about 3 to 5 days prior to our first class session. And I want to share with you that letter. And within this letter, I want you to think about what I'm saying. I'm going to start off with the bold opening. You'll see me set the tone. Then I address my pedagogy focus. And then I talk about managing the classroom, or how I manage the classroom before I start. And then we talk about the ownership of learning, and I end with something inspirational. So the letter itself is going to take about 3 minutes to get through, but I'm going to stop and tell you where I am at all points. So here it is. It's an open letter to my students, and again, I give it to them via email before the first class session. So here's the bold opening. Dear student, welcome to my class. Every student that enters my class teaches me something about teaching. I want to share some of those lessons with you that now form my teaching philosophy. I strive to practice what I preach. I demand that you think and act entrepreneurially, which requires you to develop creative solutions, take early action, accept and learn from small losses, and pivot when things do not go according to plan. I have to do the same. Teaching entrepreneurship requires continuous innovation, fearless experimentation, and structured chaos. So that's the bold opening. Now here's how I set the tone. This is the paragraph. I have learned that I must teach to excite, inspire, motivate, and even shock you. I strive to create the unexpected in order to capture attention and spark enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. I have extremely high expectations with little tolerance for mediocrity and apathy, yet the culture of my classroom is open, playful, and respectful. A class plan is necessary for organization and preparedness, but not sufficient for your learning. Flexibility, humor, reactivity, and improvisation are pillars of my philosophy. So there I'm setting the tone for what I expect in that classroom. And then I go on to the pedagogical focus, and there's a paragraph on that. Most importantly, I say, my approach to teaching is action-based. It has to be. In order to learn entrepreneurship, one must do entrepreneurship. I have worked tirelessly to ensure that you're able to practice aspects of entrepreneurship rather than just simply be passive learners. Every day I strive to create a learning laboratory for experimentation and practice in hope of creating shared ownership in the learning process. Then I stop and I go through this part where I'm setting expectations about how I plan to manage the class. And this is that paragraph. I encourage you to use your voice to debate, push back, and challenge your peers and me. I've developed confidence to do the same. But I'll admit that the little things bother me. I have zero tolerance for unprofessional behavior. Arriving to class late, being unprepared, using smartphones and laptops inappropriately, and disrespecting others has absolutely no place in my classroom. I will not hesitate to stop class, solve a particular issue, and then restart class. On the other hand, patterns of negative behavior are 100% my fault. If half the class is consumed by their phones or computers, then I'm doing something wrong. If students are constantly arriving late or leaving early or during class to go to the bathroom, get something to drink, whatever it is, fill in the blank, I'm doing something wrong. In those moments, I'm failing to engage. So in that part of the letter, I'm talking about that they have responsibilities, but also I have responsibilities. And then I go into a paragraph on the ownership of learning. The fact that I have no tolerance for unprofessional behavior does not mean I want a staid atmosphere. This would be the antithesis of entrepreneurship. I strive for class sessions that are alive, exciting, relevant, challenging, creative, innovative, and even playful and joyful. A community of learning and engagement must be omnipresent if we are going to transcend our preconceived notions of what entrepreneurship is and its importance to the world today. In other words, you have a huge responsibility as nascent or practicing entrepreneurs of all kinds to create something of economic and social value to you and others. And then finally, I end with a little bit of inspiration, both from me and for the students. I say, I also have an enormous responsibility. Entrepreneurship is a complex phenomenon, chaotic and lacking any notion of linearity. As an educator, I have the responsibility to develop your discovery, thinking, reasoning, experimentation, and implementation skills so you may lead, manage, innovate, and excel in highly uncertain entrepreneurial environments. These skills enhance the likelihood that you will identify and capture the right opportunity at the right time for the right reason. And my final paragraph, this is my close. Entrepreneurs of all kinds impact the world. So entrepreneurship education is a necessary and formidable change agent. I really want you to do something great, take action, change your world, and I will do everything I can to help facilitate your journey. Keep entrepreneuring, and I sign it, Heidi. This is a letter that I send to my students via email, and what I've learned and I haven't been doing this very long, but the past few classes, it has completely changed my first day in setting up and managing expectations. Where other faculty are complaining about students arriving late to class or leaving to go to the bathroom or laptops or whatever it may be, this simple letter has curtailed all of those issues. So if you'd like a copy of my letter, I'm happy to send it to you. Send it to me. Send me an email. There's my email address on the screen, hneck@babson.edu. Now I'd like to move on to day one choices. And I have a question for you, is what do you do on the first day of class? And we're actually going to have a poll around this question. And the poll should be open to you right now. And you have 4 questions. You have 4 answers. You can either A, review the syllabus, B, lead an icebreaker, C, introduce yourself, D, set expectations, and E, all of the above. So I'd like everyone to kind of fill out the poll as quickly as they can.
Perfect. We'll just take about 25 seconds. You could answer the poll. Okay, the answers are in. We have 3% review the syllabus, 3% lead an icebreaker, 3% introduce myself, 3% set expectations, and then 87% answered E, all of the above.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you for filling out the poll. And that's pretty much what I expected. So you have a choice on day one. You can, what I call syllabus versus shock. You can review the syllabus, or you can do something that the students aren't expecting. See, the norm is to do syllabus, maybe the students introducing themselves, us going over our expectations and our policies and the assignments that are in the syllabus, and doing even an icebreaker. And then some of us even end early. And even though this is the norm, think about that our students are probably taking 4, maybe 5 other classes at the same time, and they're doing the exact same thing. The entrepreneurship class needs to be entrepreneurial. So I really challenge you to really think about what is the first day of your class. Personally, I don't go over the syllabus. I don't even introduce myself on the first day of class. I'm always doing something that they're unexpected or that they're not expecting. But I do the norm. I just don't do it until day 2. On day 1, I've tried many different things. I'll do a simulation. I'll come in and play movie clips that pertain to entrepreneurship in some way. I do a crazy exercise. Unfortunately, there's no video here, but I do a crazy exercise where all the students have to participate in this game where you're turning a piece of paper into a boat that is ultimately becomes a t-shirt. All I do is I challenge you not to do anything around the syllabus. Make sure they get that syllabus in advance and do something unexpected, but make sure whatever you do, and we can have a Q&A about this at the end and talk about specifics, make sure it pertains to entrepreneurship. Don't do an icebreaker if it's simply just to break the ice. Do an icebreaker to ensure that the content of the icebreaker connects to entrepreneurship. And remember, an entrepreneurship class needs to be different, in my opinion. So you have to walk into the first day of class and make it different. And I'll talk to you about some research about that first day shortly when we talk about one of the tips about preparing the room. Now I want to talk about challenges versus chapters. One of my favorite authors, Ken Bain, he wrote a wonderful book about what the best college teachers do. And I love this quote. He says, good teaching is about having students answer questions or solving problems that they find intriguing, interesting, or just simply beautiful. Think about that. Solving problems and answering questions that are intriguing, interesting, or beautiful. So what I like to do is I like to take the textbook chapters or the topics of the day, and these are select chapter titles from my new textbook that just came out through Sage called Entrepreneurship, the Practice, and the Mindset. And these are just 1, 2, 3, 4, these are just 7 of the chapter titles. And in my syllabus, I don't put the topic and I don't put the chapter title, but I put the question that the class session is going to answer, or the class session or the challenge that the class session is going to revolve around. So let's take a look at some of these chapter titles. Instead of just saying the topic of the day is generating new ideas, it's really about how might we develop our creative selves. And it's not just about using design thinking, it's about how might we create solutions to meet the needs of customers. It's not just about testing and experimenting in markets. The question is how might we design and run simple market tests to evaluate promising opportunities. Business models becomes how might we design effective business models that create, deliver, and capture value. Networks becomes how might we develop our network with purpose and intention so it can be a resource to pursue new ventures. Or bootstrapping becomes how might we pursue a venture with very limited resources. Or pitching your idea may be how might we communicate our ideas effectively, confidently, and passionately to elicit a positive response to a call of action. I have found when we all have a question or a challenge or a problem to rally around, it focuses the class more. And not only do I put this in my syllabus, but I also put this on the whiteboard before the students come into class. So we always see the question that this class session is seeking to answer. Sometimes we get at very finite answers, other times it's a bit more ambiguous, but it guides our conversation at all times. And it also gives me an excuse that when conversations or activities start to diverge, I use it as an excuse to say, hey guys, remember, this is the challenge of today. This is the question that we're trying to answer, and it gives me an excuse to bring the class back together. So again, that's turning chapter titles or content session titles into challenging and provocative questions that are intriguing and maybe even a little bit beautiful. The fourth the fourth tip I want to talk about is preparing the room. There's a lot of things that you can do to prepare the room. And I think we all know that we should get to the room 10 minutes early, shake hands with students, talk to students. But remember, that is your space. And we're creating culture. What we put in that space is very important. So I always have the challenge on the board. Maybe on a PowerPoint slide I have some interesting facts or something for them to think about. But I also want you to think about yourself and you in the front of that room, whether it's day 1 or day 2, 3, 4, 5, or 35. There was an interesting study done at Harvard in the early 90s. And I want to share with you a little bit of the findings from this study. Students rated 13 teachers after watching 30 seconds of video of those teachers teaching on day 1. Okay? 13 students were rating 13 different teachers after watching 30 seconds of video. For each teacher, they took 10 seconds from the first 10 minutes of class, 10 seconds from the middle part of the class, and 10 seconds from the final few minutes of the class. And the students were supposed to rate the students on a lot of these nonverbal behaviors that I'll show you shortly. Then what they did, the researchers, they used that data on nonverbal behaviors to predict the teaching effectiveness at the end of the semester. In other words, they were using the course evaluations at the end of the semester. So one more time, students were rating the teachers on nonverbal behavior, and the researchers were trying to use those ratings to predict the final teaching ratings. And they were able to do that with statistical significance. In other words, what we do in the first 30 seconds of our classes can have implications on how students evaluate us at the end. So here are the nonverbals. They had 15 nonverbals, and 9 of these came up as significant: being active, showing that you're being confident, showing confidence, dominance, enthusiasm, likability, optimism, and being supportive and warmth. What I didn't tell you about this 30 seconds of video was that the students rating this 30 seconds of video could not hear the professor. It was all nonverbal. So the takeaway here is when you're preparing the room, we do need to think about our own nonverbal cues. You know, are we coming across as competent, confident, active, enthusiastic, likable, optimistic, supportive, and warm? But in addition to that, what can we do just in the environment? Writing something provocative on the whiteboard, putting Post-it notes around the room, or flip charts, or whatever it is about the content of that day that can create the environment for that day. And then you can take it off the walls or take it off the PowerPoint. So again, it only takes 30 seconds. I'm fascinated by this study, and you can see the citation up there. The last thing I want to talk about before we turn it over to some Q&A is just in general, in an entrepreneurship course, particularly in an intro to entrepreneurship course, my goal is to make my students think and act more entrepreneurially. And I do that by practicing what I call the 5 practices of entrepreneurship education. And this came out in an earlier book that I wrote in 2014, and is also highlighted in my textbook that came out in 2017. Whenever I design a class session around entrepreneurship, the exercises and the experiential learning that I'm doing needs to meet one or more of these practices. The practice of play, or the things that students are doing, is it joyful and engaging and fun? the practice of empathy. Are the things that I'm having the students do, does it help them develop empathy for either entrepreneurs or customers? The practice of creation. Are the things that I'm doing in my classroom, is it helping the students to understand the process of creativity and learning through action and building new things and evaluating those new things for value? And then the fourth one, the practice of experimentation. Are the things I'm doing in my classroom helping my students take early action, get out there, get feedback, test new ideas, and not just sit behind their computer and write up plans? And then the middle thing, the practice of reflection. Am I doing things with my students that allow them to reflect on all the actions that they're doing? Because what I'm doing in my classroom is very much experiential and action-based. But am I giving them time to reflect? So every time I plan a class session and the exercises and the activities and the discussions that I'm planning to have in that session, I have to ask myself, am I helping my students practice experimenting, practice developing empathy, practice creating, practice reflecting, or even just giving them a chance to enjoy? And if the answer is yes, then I know I'm on my path to helping my students develop a mindset for thinking and acting entrepreneurially. So I'm using all of those practices with every single chapter, or at least I'm trying to say with every challenge. So for example, how might we develop our creative selves? What am I doing in that classroom to help my students practice creation, or practice empathy, or practice experimentation? And not all practices are in play in every class, but I make sure I have a decent balance throughout the semester so I know they're leaving thinking and acting more entrepreneurially. So with that, I just wanted to quickly go through the letter that I use, the day one choices that I make, how I turn chapters and content into provocative questions, how I prepare the room, and I take that seriously. The first 10 minutes really happens before the class starts. And then the 5 practices I use to generate a more entrepreneurial experience for my students in hopes that they're thinking and acting more entrepreneurially. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to any comments or questions that we have from our listeners.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heidi. So yes, let's move on to our Q&A session. Again, we're answering questions that have come into the Q&A box to the right or the bottom corner of the main presentation screen, or those that have come from Twitter using the hashtag SageTalk. Finally, once again, if we can't get to all of the questions by the end of the hour, Heidi has kindly agreed to address them in a follow-up blog post on our Sage blog, Sage Connection. So the first question that has come in, it says, using textbooks versus articles and cases, which type of material would you recommend and why?
That's a really good question. So obviously I just wrote a textbook that came out in January, but the irony is that I haven't used a textbook for years because I never could find a textbook that was really covering the content that I wanted to cover in an intro to entrepreneurship class. So it just, there's not an either or answer. Sometimes it's a combination of. I just find that if I can get everything into a single textbook, that's easier for my students. But entrepreneurship is so multidisciplinary and it's so interesting. There's so many great things out there that I think it's going to be a combination of both.
Perfect. Okay, next question. What suggestions do you have in developing an entrepreneurship major/program?
Look, that's a big question. So major is different from program because program, in my opinion, constitutes not just the classes that constitute the major, but also the co-curricular stuff that complements what's going on in the classroom. My advice for a major is to tell a story. The classes need to tell a story of what the students are going to get as a result of the classes. But students also want flexibility, so you may have different pathways because entrepreneurship is broadly defined, in my opinion. It's not simply about starting up a new business, but it's about corporate entrepreneurship. It's about starting nonprofits. It's about even bringing entrepreneurship into government activities. And certainly it's about the mindset because any student going through a major in entrepreneurship whether they start a business or not, it doesn't matter to me. But wherever they go in life, what they learn through an entrepreneurship major is going to have great value and benefit because it creates a whole brain thinker. So I know I'm being long-winded on this answer, but without telling you the exact number of courses, I think that you need a storyline. And you need a storyline that attracts those that are not simply there to start a business. You want to attract a larger population of students. The programming, the stuff that's going co-curricular on the co-curricular side, the accelerators, the competitions, all of that can be geared towards the startup community.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, next question. In an Intro to Entrepreneurship class for juniors and seniors, my colleagues and I are debating whether to focus the main class project on developing a business plan and a pitch or on consulting for a startup so that they become exposed to the entrepreneurial process and learn from others. What do you think is more appropriate for an introductory class?
For an introductory class, I would suggest they work on their own. Before I started answering this question, I was going to say, well, why don't you just give the students a choice? Some can work on a consulting project and some can work on their own ideas. But then I'm like, no, because a lot of them are going to take the easy way out, which is working on someone else's project. I really think it's important that students experience kind of the process of coming up with a new idea, of vetting that idea, of getting out into the community and getting feedback on that idea and understanding how to identify needs of customers and creating solutions to meet those needs of customers, and then getting out again and testing those solutions in the real world, and just showing the kind of the pathway of bringing an idea to fruition. So I'm also against the business plan. I don't think they actually need to do the business plan in the intro stage. I think you need to get them to a pitch and maybe a feasibility plan or a business brief. But I think most of an intro class should be around developing the mindset, getting them understanding how ideas are created, understanding customer needs, pitching ideas to meet those needs, understanding how to bootstrap, how to start when you have no money, no resources, and then pitching.
Perfect, thanks so much. So we have, hi Heidi. How do you use the entrepreneurship theory and action worksheet when students are part of a team or individually?
Have I used the entrepreneurship theory and action worksheet in the textbook?
I'm not sure. It does not say. If someone, whoever wrote that question, yeah, if someone wants to clarify that question, send it in to us and we can come back to it.
Because I'm not sure exactly what the theory and action worksheet is.
Okay. Yeah. If someone wants to clarify in that question box, please do so. We will definitely come back to it.
Oh, they may be talking about the well, okay, let them come back, okay.
Okay. Let's see. For online courses, what do you suggest to do in designing a capstone entrepreneurship course?
Another huge question. Is it 100%? If it's 100% online, I don't really have a lot of experience in that because the online stuff that we do at Babson is a hybrid approach. So there are certain times of the year where the students are coming back to campus, and that allows us to do a lot of interactive and experiential stuff with them face-to-face in campus. But if it's a capstone and it's depending on the number of students, you really need to create groups where they're able to work together in order to produce something of value. I don't think anyone should leave, whether it's online or face-to-face, no one should leave a college curriculum in business and entrepreneurship without starting something of some type. And it may not be a business, but they have to bring something to fruition. And I think that can be done online if you have geographic teams. But if you have more specifics around that question, ask me something more specific, or you can talk to me offline.
Okay. Another question. Can you give an example of a very engaging exercise and how you utilize multidisciplinary in a classroom setting?
give you an example of an engaging exercise, and the second part was, what was the second part?
And how you utilize multidisciplinary in a classroom setting. Looks like there's a typo there.
Okay. I'm going to need a little bit more detail in the second part of that question, but I'll go ahead and answer the first question. One of the questions one of the exercises I always start a class off with is, I call this the quilt and puzzle exercise. It's grounded in the theory of effectuation, for those of you, for the researchers out there. So what the quilt and puzzle exercise is I separate students into groups. Let's just say we have 50 students, and I separate them into 10 groups of 5, and they're at different tables. And if I have breakout rooms, that's more ideal, but I'll just use the tables right now. And I give them all a jigsaw puzzle to create. I say, you have X amount of time, you need to put together this jigsaw puzzle as quickly as you possibly can. So I allow 10 minutes or so to go by, and then I start pulling people away from their tables, take volunteers, and I bring them into an entirely different room. And one by one, they come out of the puzzle room into what I call the quilting room. And I give them a bunch of fabric. And each person that comes into the quilting room, I say, you have 6 pieces of fabric, and you need to choose this fabric from the table, and then start creating a quilt, just a patchwork of fabric on the floor. No sewing required. So again, in one room, they're putting together jigsaw puzzles. I'm pulling people out one by one, bringing them into the quilting room, where they're starting to build quilts on the ground. And then as time goes by, eventually all the people from the jigsaw puzzle room are in the quilting room, and they're all working on creating quilts. And that can go as little as 10 minutes or as long as a half an hour, depending on how many people you have and how much time you want to give. The value of this exercise is in the debrief. So we bring them all back into the same room, and I ask them, how many of you enjoy working on the puzzles more than the quilts? And let's just say of that 50, let's just say it's 25. And then I say, okay, how many of you enjoyed working on the quilts more than the puzzles? And then the remaining 25. And then we have a conversation about what did you like about the jigsaw puzzle? And the common things that will come up are clear goal, it was challenging yet familiar, everyone could get to work immediately because they knew what they were doing, there was a strategy we could employ, and we knew when we were finished. And then I asked the people who enjoyed the quilting, I'm like, what did you enjoy about the quilting? And they're like, well, we liked that there was actually no right answer, it was more creative. We really didn't know what we were doing, so we just started putting stuff on the ground. A design kind of emerged over time because new people kept coming to the group and changing what the quilt looked like, so you really couldn't plan. It was engaging, and it was more fun. And then I asked the students, I'm like, well, why do you think we did this? And eventually what comes out is that the puzzle is more analogous to managerial thinking, and the quilting is more analogous to entrepreneurial thinking. And it's not an either or. This is a very important part. It's not an either or. I tell my students we need both ways of thinking, but we're already really good at this managerial side. We're already really good at the jigsaw puzzles. So in my entrepreneurship course, we're going to be focusing more on this quilting side. And we need to get you more comfortable in environments where quilting is needed. But again, you need both. Managerial and entrepreneurial thinking is like speaking 2 languages. So for those of you that speak Spanish and English, you know when you should be speaking Spanish and you know when you should be speaking English. Students run into a challenge where they think they're speaking entrepreneurship, but in fact they're speaking management. And it also has implications for our teaching, because we also have to ask ourselves, what are we teaching? Are we really teaching entrepreneurship, or are we teaching management? So there's lots of ways to use this exercise in a debrief, and so I hope that kind of answers one of the more engaging exercises. That happens at the beginning of the semester.
Great. Next question is, what simulations do you use?
I use 2 right now. I use, and I apologize for the self-promotion, I use one called Venture Blocks, and I actually co-created that simulation, and it's also featured in the textbook, and that helps students learn how to go out and talk to people and interview them in order to identify their needs, and then how we use that data and convert those needs into insights from which new ideas can be born. And it's a design thinking kind of focus. The other one that I've used is actually coming from Babson, and it's called the Entrepreneurial Leadership Simulation. And it's a real short simulation that helps the students understand why entrepreneurship is important in even large organizations. Because I teach a class that's required, so I can't assume all of my students want to start a business. And so I try to do a lot of things that show them that what they're learning is transferable to other environments.
Great. What are your thoughts on bringing in guest speakers versus videos of guest speakers the students can watch on their own time?
I think live guest speakers in the classroom are always engaging to students because it gives them a way to expand their network. Because I think what's really important is giving the students time at the end of class to interact one-on-one with the speakers. And I tell my speakers that we're actually going to end class early so some students can interact with you one-on-one. However, I don't like having a bunch of guest speakers live because all of our schools have a lot of seminars, or not seminars, but lots of speakers on campus that they can go to. So I really like to have my classroom flipped where they're engaging in exercises and experiential learning and hands-on practice. In terms of the question around videos, I certainly believe in a lot of video content, but I don't believe in using that video content in the classroom for a long period of time. I won't use anything longer than 2 or 3 minutes. So I think it's important if you want them to see a speaker that they watch that outside of class.
Okay. We have some clarification to one of the earlier questions. It says, to clarify my question, how do your students use the entrepreneurship thought and action worksheet in your class? I learned about it in January at Babson SEE. I'm curious about its use for teams versus individuals.
Okay, good. I now know what you're talking about, and I use that for individuals. It can, I guess it can be used for teams, but I particularly just use it for individuals.
Okay, we have another clarified question. It was about the engaging exercise question, that second part of it. They want to know how Heidi utilizes having a classroom makeup of different disciplinary backgrounds, different students.
So so at the graduate level, you know, we have so many different countries represented, so many different backgrounds. But when you're teaching an Intro to Entrepreneurship course, it kind of brings everyone down to the same level. If there are any students in my classes that have started businesses, I definitely bring that experience into the classroom. But I haven't found any issues with having engineers in the classroom, with medical folks in the classroom, with just business folks, with high-tech folks. A lot of what I focus on the Intro to Entrepreneurship class really transcends disciplines. And I set that up in the beginning of the class, you know, in terms of what I'm expecting from them.
What methods of student evaluation would you use in an intro course?
I'm using individual projects and group projects and reflections. I do not do exams, but again, this is a graduate level course that I'm currently teaching. When I was teaching at the undergraduate level, it was mostly group projects and individual papers, individual assignments, going out and doing something. So I have lots of application assignments where we do something in the class that we practice, and then they have to go out and do it again, and then they have to write up what they did. And I use lots of mini assignments that way, and they add up over time. But the two big projects is a pitch and a feasibility exercise. Again, I don't use exams.
Okay, next question. How can you encourage entrepreneurial thinking outside of the classroom?
If I'm interpreting the question correctly, it's a matter of what they're doing outside the classroom. So for example, if we have a class session on design thinking and I bring them through a simulation around design thinking, I'm expecting them to go out and practice that outside the classroom. So whatever they're doing inside the classroom, I'm just building up their confidence so they know what they're doing outside the classroom. So I'm hoping that that always pertains. I've also experimented with a kind of a group blog or a Google Doc where every week people are forced to, or required to type in what they have done entrepreneurial that week. And what you'll see on a Google Doc like that is how people are starting to define what entrepreneurial is. Like somebody will even put, well, I went to a seminar in Boston on healthcare and I know nothing about healthcare. And to me, I learned X, Y, and Z. So to them, that was doing something new, and that was kind of an entrepreneurial thing because they just kind of went and did it. Or someone may have completely even redecorated their dorm room in a crazy creative way. Someone may think that that's entrepreneurial. We do have something at Babson that we talk about here called living entrepreneurially. You know, you're in class X amount of hours a week, and there's like 168 hours, I think, in a week. Don't do the math for me. So what are you doing the rest of the time that's allowing you to live entrepreneurially? So it's just asking them these questions so they realize that they are being very entrepreneurial outside the classroom. They just don't know it.
Yeah, perfect. Another question, any more info on what you do on the first day of class?
So the first day, so I'll take you through my first day of class on the MBA level, because that's just what I'm teaching right now. We walk in, students are walking in, music is playing. It's actually blaring. It's really loud. Not too loud where someone's going to ask me to turn it down, but it's loud. It's not just background music. It's loud. There's something written on the board. I have a quote that I use that I'm happy to send it to you. It's a long quote, but it's about what happens when we close certain doors and open new doors, and when we just start taking action, how things just kind of start to fall into place. But we have to take that action. So that's all happening as they come in. I'm introducing, I'm going shaking hands, asking them how they are, where they're from, that type of stuff. And then class starts, the clock strikes the bewitching hour. They all have a blank sheet of paper on their desk, and I ask them this opening question. I say, how entrepreneurial are you on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being least entrepreneurial and 10 being so entrepreneurial that they probably shouldn't even be in the course right now. And so I kind of gauge where the room is, and I write down like how many have 1 to 4, how many have 5, how many have 6 to 8, and how many gave 9s and 10s. And then I say, I'm going to introduce you. I said, I'm going to give you a test that's going to help me actually gauge what these numbers mean. It's a test in your entrepreneurial ability. And that's when I bring them on this kind of really, it's a story where they're taking a sheet of paper and turning that sheet of paper into a boat that ultimately, through the course of the story, turns into a T-shirt. And I can't really tell you exactly what I do because you can't see me. But I'm happy to Skype with whoever's asking the question. I am happy to walk you through it. But what this exercise does is I ask them, it's a crazy exercise. They feel like kids. They feel like kindergartners, and they're not even sure what they're doing. And then the exercise ends, or the story ends, and I say, what does this have to do with entrepreneurship? And then we have this wonderful discussion about what this exercise, how it pertains to entrepreneurship, and that leads us into a discussion on what is entrepreneurship. From there, I bring them into results of a simulation that I had them play prior to coming to class, and that's that simulation from Babson about them thinking entrepreneurially inside of a large corporation. And then we immediately jump into ideas that they brought into the class, and we start. I even make some students pitch on the spot. But again, I don't go over the syllabus. I don't even introduce myself besides my name. and I don't even tell them what the class is about until the very end of the class. And at the very end of the class, I show them a graphic syllabus. And what I mean by a graphic syllabus, it's really just a map. It's showing them what they're going to go through in the class sessions, but the syllabus is their responsibility to read.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Let's see. Can we find some of these in-class exercises you described in your textbook?
Yeah, so when you adopt the textbook, for every chapter in that textbook, the faculty member, the teacher, the instructor, whatever we want to call ourselves, the instructor is given an in-class exercise to use in the classroom. And it's highly experiential and it's highly detailed teaching note that tells you what to do, how to do it, how much time it's going to take, what materials you need, and also any pitfalls you may encounter, because all these exercises have been tested.
Great. Thank you so much. Then for group and team projects, do you use peer evaluations to determine a grade distribution, undergraduate, lower division level course?
Yes. I use, for my undergraduate courses, I have used a rubric that says, you know, you have 100 percentage points, and you have to divvy up that 100 percentage points across the team. And this is an individual exercise. So if you have 5 people in a team, they're each given a sheet of paper that says, all right, now you need to divvy up these 100 points across the team, and they cannot be equal. So you cannot give 20 points to every student. Someone always does more work. And then I use that to bring students down. Students cannot be elevated. A group grade is a group grade. But students that didn't pull their weight, I will use that rubric to bring students down. And I use a variation of that for the MBA program as well.
Great. Is the venture blocks in your new book?
Yes, that is bundled with the textbook.
Yeah, just to clarify, yeah, it is. It's a $10 add-on with Heidi's new textbook. And then we have another question about online teaching. How can an instructor teaching online make their online course feel more entrepreneurial?
I think if you can utilize more of kind of group spaces and group whiteboards and really throw out the provocative questions and have them go and still do stuff and then bring that back to the group for discussion in a synchronous way. And if it's completely asynchronous, they still need to go out and do stuff. They need to submit stuff that tells them what they did and tells you what they did and what they learned. This is a tough one. This is a tough question to answer, to tell you the truth, because entrepreneurship is so much about human interaction and physical engagement. Even with all of these, even with social networking today, entrepreneurs still come together physically because it's so lonely without it. And so you need to somehow create these virtual spaces for the students to interact. I think that's one of the most important things in an online environment.
What is industry telling you about your graduates? Meeting their needs?
What graduates? The entrepreneurship graduates or graduates in general?
I would think so. Maybe you're right. Yeah, entrepreneurship graduates.
Well, you have to keep in mind that Babson at the undergraduate level is we're a business school, so our students are all graduating with a degree in management, and they can concentrate in entrepreneurship. Some that are concentrating in entrepreneurship are going off and starting their ventures, probably 10%, and the rest that are concentrating in entrepreneurship are going into industry. And one of the things that our recruiters do tell us is that the Babson student, because entrepreneurship permeates everything that we do, it's not just a discipline here, that the Babson student thinks and acts a different way than many of the other students that they're interviewing. So I do think that this entrepreneurship stuff whether they're taking specific classes or just doing it outside the classroom, has a lot of value to industry, just in the way they're thinking. I mean, when you really think about what we're doing as educators in business schools today, is we're really trying to educate students to be ready for jobs that don't even exist yet. And so the more that we can help our students think and act entrepreneurially, the better off they're going to be in navigating the future on their own.
Perfect. And I think that is it for the questions that have come in. And we're also reaching the end of our time, so that's perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's Sage Talk, and thank you so much, Heidi. Please be on the lookout for an email that includes a link to view this entire webinar on our website coming the next few weeks. And thanks for your attention. We really hope you'll join us for another Sage Talk webinar again in the future. Have a great day, everybody.